Welcome to Women Igniting Change, the place to be for women leaders and decision makers who are passionate about changing the world and determined to act. I'm your host, Robin Jorgensen, former corporate executive, global speaker, and founder and CEO of Women Igniting Change. Let's dive in. Hello, changemakers. Welcome back to the Women Igniting Change podcast. Today, I have the privilege of introducing you to Nikki Lanier, who is an internationally recognized race equity strategist and CEO of Harper, Slade, which is a race equity advisory firm. She is a former HR executive and senior vice president of the Federal Reserve in St. Louis. She is an employment attorney. She was the youngest and first Black female gubernatorial appointee to the Personnel Cabinet Secretary for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and so many more accolades. I'm literally going to have to just put them in the show notes. So Nikki, welcome to the show.
Oh, Robin, thank you. I'm excited to talk with your listeners and just to have this conversation. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. So what shaped your passion for racial equity and led you to not only a career in HR, but eventually founding Harper Slade?
Yeah. So as you know, as is the case for most of us these days, there's just so much kind of dimension and tapestry, so many experiences that gave rise to the way that my career has ultimately manifested. I guess I'll start with how my rearing was experienced. So I was raised by two parents who were very involved in the civil rights movement, my father more violently so. And I am an only child, and I was raised for the most part on the campus of an HBCU, Hampton University. And so, Robin, I had in my very kind of early incubating years, a really clear and poignant and painful vision of the plight of Black people, as has been told to me by my parents. They were sharing with me their own experiences growing up, and then working and living and existing and growing up on a Black college campus where all these professors and the chairs of the departments and the deans of various schools and the college would often come to our home, and I would just listen to the way that they talked about Black navigation. And so that was kind of my rooting, that is my anchor. And then on top of that, I was able to overlay professional experiences like practicing law. I went to the University of Miami for law school, and I did labor and employment law, and then I did HR for a gazillion years, and I've worked for the public and private sector, and East Coast and West Coast. I've been the chief HR officer for 3 different organizations, learned a lot about how work works, when and where it restores, when and how it depletes. And then, of course, as you shared, I work for the Federal Reserve, not in a legal or HR capacity. I did more like macroeconomics, monetary theory. And so I've got this kind of in utero understanding of the Black life navigation and the elusive American promise that, finds its way episodically, maybe, into the lives of Black people. That is a part of who I am. And on top of that, now I've got great academic and professional credentialing, which has now positioned me to bring a different lens to the way that I work this work around race and equity and the interplay with that with economics.
So how has your diverse background that you just described influenced your approach to racial equity and organizational change?
Yeah, I mean, it is the lens through which I see the entire world. So that like the who I am more than the what I know and what I do informs the way that I work. And at the center of it, Robin, is grace. So I was raised by very graceful parents who were beautifully imbued with so much patience and so much of a rich understanding of like the human condition and like fundamentals of how do you change hearts and minds on certain doctrines and theories to include race and racism. So I didn't grow up in a household that was anger-led or frustration-led, though there was anger and there was frustration on this topic. It didn't lead that. It wasn't led in that way. So I watched my parents be very thoughtful in how they formulated their points of view on a number of areas that they were looking to help change, bring around change in the world and in our family, the macro and micro level. And now, like having studied law and being able to understand critical thinking and dissecting arguments and really focusing on outcomes, married with my human resources experience, understanding the psychology of the human being at work, what we must actually experience from work, how we all long to be fed by work and what we're willing to give to work, and all of that fragility that comes with just being our most vulnerable selves sometimes at work, and or being our most hardened selves, and understanding all of that. And of course now the macroeconomics. So the lens helps me to formulate discussion points inside of companies that's less about like the social justice and the right thing to do, and more about, if we look at the browning of the country as an example, and we know that America is becoming blacker and browner, so what does that mean for the kind of employee that we must now court and retain and fully activate? What does it also mean for the kind of customer? The prototype of the customer is fundamentally changing, darkening, and we're coming from communities that most people have very little experience around and understanding of. And so I'm able to give a different kind of context to the work, and a different nestling of the work inside of principles and doctrines that most companies already hold dear. And I do all of that with a very grace-centered approach, looking for partnerships.
What a beautiful gift your parents gave you. And even just eventually participating in as you got older, but even just witnessing and listening to, and having that become part of who you be as a woman and as a human being. What an amazing gift. All right, so let's transition over to Harper Slade for a little bit. You've said that Harper Slade is in the belief challenging business, which I absolutely love. What are some of the innovative strategies or approaches that you use to challenge and transform those deep-seated beliefs that you see within organizations?
Yeah, I'd say, Robin, the most avant-garde is probably the most simple, and that is to invite an exploration of, an assessment of, an understanding of what we have all been taught to believe about the value of people who are different at work, right? So I'm actually asking these kinds of questions before we really delve into the what of the work. I really want to understand, like, what do we already believe? We're coming into the workplace, we walk into any kind of social construct already believing something about something already, right? So, but we spend so little time really unearthing and understanding that belief. And in my opinion, that's really where the work lies. Right. So most consultants, most people, most organizations tend to value the stuff and things, like the activity, the choice, the behavior. What are we doing? I'm far more interested in unearthing your being state. Who are you at the core? What have we all been taught to understand?
Right.
About darker skinned people in particular, and finding a way to just give words to it, because we have hard times. Most of us have a very difficult time in the workplace just saying the words like Black people, white people. We can't even say it, let alone acknowledge what it means. What those designations have come to mean, right or wrong, what they've come to mean. Right. And so if we can't even do that, then we're never going to get to the work that's really meaningful to start understanding how to reset how humans engage with one another.
Right. So how do you get at those deep-seated beliefs? What are some of the activities that you do to, one, create a safe container for that exploration and conversation? But what are some of the nuanced things that you do to get people to open up and say, here is what I believe?
Yeah.
Open to shifting it, but here's where I'm coming from.
Yep. Okay. Let me push on something real quick and I'll answer that. So it's not so much about the safe, because I don't know that I ever can create a safe environment. But what we do want is like the courageous environment. We want you to move the work forward in spite of feeling unsafe, because everything about this work is disruptive, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So one of the best ways to do it, in my opinion, is to start with the conversation. So we almost start every single engagement with a series of conversations. This is the Nikki Lanier speaker series. And I come into an organization, I speak with the board, if that's appropriate for that organization, at the leadership level, and then usually like an all employee or an all manager or something, to kind of help us orient our brain to think about what it will feel like, what it must feel like in order for us to be vulnerable at work around this particular topic. And then we follow it up with what we call our DEI sentiment survey. And it's just really an assessment along the dimensions of diversity related questions, inclusion related questions, and certainly equities, because we lean more in my firm toward racial equity, really designed to unearth what are you feeling and believing and thinking about right now that informs the way you're going to be approaching the DEI work to come.
Yep.
Those two together, like the speaker series and the DEI unearthing, the DEI assessment unearthing, helps to ripen. We call it like tilling the ground.
Yeah.
For the DEI seeds to be planted. So we have to first acknowledge that there is a place for you to write down, or to at least spend some time thinking about, what do I believe? What do I believe? And where did that belief come from? And how much do I kind of benignly just reinforce it without knowing it?
Right.
And so we chronicle all that. We get you to a place where we're asking questions that you've probably never been asked about people who are different. And we're like, all of those things, where did it come from? And why do I think that? And how do I feed it? And how do I jettison before we start the actual work? So we're not talking about it live yet. The safer place is to kind of document it inside of, inside of this, of some sort of survey, and then giving rise to the conversations that come out of that is a way to start talking about the beliefs.
Yeah, I love that, because one, it brings the beliefs to a conscious level, and unless they're conscious, you can't do anything with them. So it brings them to a conscious level, and good, bad, or ugly, we are raised with the values and beliefs and perspectives of those who raised us.
Yeah.
And as grown adults, we get to choose differently. But a lot of times it's so unconscious that we don't even realize, oh, wait, I can choose a different belief than what I was raised in. I get to do that as a leader, which is amazing. I love that.
That's right.
So you had this amazing tool called REI, the Racial Equity Index. And it's a way for you to diagnose and address inequities within organizations. Tell us a little bit more about that tool and the unexpected insights that it yields for you and for the organization.
Oh, yeah. So this is the Racial Equity Index is an assessment product that presumes, it doesn't ask if, it asks how, race-rooted differences in how the employment experience is experienced, how they manifest. So said differently, if you look at the entire employee life cycle, how people come in, what happens while they're there, and even as many prepare to exit, what about that life cycle experience is colored, no pun intended, by your hue, by your skin, by your ethnicity? And I guess the corollary to that would be most employee pulse surveys or engagement surveys that you try to discern and pull out. Okay, if you pull out all the Black and brown employees, what does that tell you? This presumes that there is a difference. We just need to know how that manifests. And so it helps to illuminate for an employer specific gaps along race-based lines that are very subtle oftentimes. Things like how often Black and brown employees are praised publicly versus praised privately is very different than white employees. The kind of public criticism on email, you get the reply all when it's time to condemn or maybe chastise, correct Black and brown employees, but just the reply when it's white employees. You wouldn't know who's going to ask that, like with that level of nuance. But those are things that are extraordinarily common in terms of how we are wired to think about feedback and how feedback comes. And like we talk about like proximity to decision makers, and how oftentimes in most organizations, it's the Black and brown employees that have the least amount of proximity to decision makers. And so the currency is in the proximity, not necessarily the race. So if we're thinking about who are the plum assignments and the in-place enrichment opportunities and promotional opportunities tend to go to those with greater proximity. Right. And if you don't have Black and brown in proximity, then there's a miss there. So we ask a lot of questions about the extent to which employees have access, unfettered, unscheduled access to their decision makers, and even outside of the workplace, the work hours. And then we ask questions about code switching. We ask questions about kind of performance measures and methodologies. As an example, one big aha that tends to be true of a lot of our clients, I would say a lot of organizations in general, is that Black and brown employees tend to be held to account more for how people feel about them. Like,
Mm,
you need to be, such and such is uncomfortable with you, Nikki, so you need to fix that, right? Black and brown employees tend to get that more than white employees. Again, something that is hard to understand. How do you craft a question around that? Because
right,
who's thinking about that? Most
right,
white people don't think about that kind of stuff.
right.
So those are the kinds of questions that we help you better understand so that you can, assign an appropriate remedy or a plan of action against.
What is some of the reactions that you get from an organization that has taken that assessment? To your point, this is not business as usual. This is not status quo. This is something very unique and amazing. But it's going to challenge them a little bit to really think of, oh, wow, do we really do that? Oh, yeah, we do. What is the
Mhm.
reaction you hear from organizations when they take that assessment?
Oh, shock and awe. I mean, lots of surprise, as you might imagine. Again, there's just very little visibility around this. And by the time that most of us are adults, there's very little understanding that that's even a thing,
Right,
right? That's even a thing. And the thing thematically throughout an organization becomes a huge shock, a shock for a lot of our employers. Because most of our employers are well-intended, well-meaning, but to be blunt, fairly myopic.
right.
We've been conditioned to know a singular way to think about how work is navigated and how work is experienced. And while we may understand that there could be differences in how people experience work, we don't understand that those differences play out in almost always play out in fairly consistent ways with Black and brown people. Um, and we don't want to necessarily always kind of deal with what that means. We now have to feel, what does that mean about me as a leader, as a CEO? How do I feel about and reconcile my own angst around this, and maybe my own contribution to these dynamics? And so we had to spend a lot of time kind of working around the shame and guilt sometimes it comes from this, making sure that our clients don't get stymied in either of those, and also making sure that you're not owning realities and dynamics that you didn't actually create. So I don't want to like necessarily get employers off the hook on this, but the reality is we have all inherited a narrative that says Black and brown people matter in certain contexts and conditions and in certain circumstances, and white people for the most part matter almost all the time. We've inherited that. So we didn't create it. None of us drawing breath today. We just don't talk about it. And we don't realize how much of that plays out subtly in the way that we experience work. And
Yeah.
so we try to help them like massage that and deal with all of the emotions that come from that. And like, don't be condemning yourself. Don't be self-sabotaging. Don't like watch your self-talk on this. Now you know better, you do better. And so from that, we help them develop a racial equity plan that folds into their employee engagement strategies and their workforce pipeline strategies so that they're now better positioned to cultivate environments, not just where Black and brown talent can thrive. We want all employees to thrive, but now that we recognize that there are certain realities in the way that work is worked here along racial lines, and we also know that the customer base, the client base, and the applicant pools henceforward are becoming Blacker and browner, then
Mhm.
now we're duty bound, right, to carve out a plan to remedy what we've now unearthed.
Yeah. So, how do you measure success at Harper Slade? So, you have an organization, they take the RAI, they create this racial equity plan. How do you measure success once that's infused into the organization?
Yeah. So Robin, this is where it gets a little squirrely because everything you just said is success to me.
Okay. I love that. I love
And I want our clients to rest in that. We can't think
Okay.
about DEI and certainly race specific, multicultural specific work in the traditional way that we've been taught to value ROI, right? It doesn't work. They're incongruent theories
Yeah.
because one is activity based, right? So you can measure ROI by how many race based trainings did we have, how many potluck dinners, wear your heritage to work day. Like, okay, so is that a measurement? I would argue it's not. It
Right.
may be measurement, but not worth measuring. So there's like the way that we have been conditioned to think about ROI is very much about outcome, activity, output, immediate goal attainment, right? This is racial equity work that we're unearthing belief systems and disrupting the way that we've work and asking questions of ourselves that we've never asked before, and trying to understand and navigate language, new nomenclature, new frameworks, new ideals, new ideologies, new strategies that we're trying to wrap our heads around first in the workplace, which is like super hard place to do all of that. And to the extent that we can now say out loud words like Black people, white people, Hispanic people, in the
Right.
same way that we can men, women, right? And we have comfort in that. And we now know that we have a racial equity plan in place that says we're going to really pay attention to concerted efforts to assure Black and brown economic and financial mobility, that we're moving them through. We have programs to move these folks through, recognizing that we already had programs to make sure that they didn't move through, but we didn't call it that because we didn't know it, right? So that's success. Like that, each of those things is success in a world that has never had to be challenged around any of these principles before, especially in the workplace.
I love that perspective. That's incredible. I love that.
Thank you.
So as you and I know, collaboration is often key to driving any type of change. Discuss how you approach partnerships or collaborations with Harper, Slade in advancing your mission. What does that look like?
So I'll answer that in two ways. One is we regard our advisor-client relationship as a partner. Beautiful. So at its core, I really desperately want to be seen and experienced by my clients as an advisor, as a trusted advisor, not a consultant coming in to fix, but an advisor helping to illuminate, helping to build, and helping to assure that the overall organization's success is felt with a capital S and not lowercase or episodic S's. Mm-hmm. So I see my work as a partner in that regard. And we have really now on our third year in, we're starting to look more thoughtfully at how we can partner with other organizations to do what I call the in and through work. So that I want to be an advisor in your organization and through your organization. So we're now starting to look at like law firms and other consulting partners. We've just signed an agreement with Mercer as an example. And so we're looking at like, how can we help augment and support your own race and equity and multiculturalism strategies and your diversity and inclusion strategies as employer, but also as solution provider for the clients that you serve. So that's something that we're really looking to explore in 2024 and beyond. I'm really excited about that particular area of impact.
Yeah, we may need to have you back on at the end of the year because that's a whole part two. I love that.
Yeah. Yep.
So let's talk about the economic impact of racism. And this is something that's on your website as well. You've mentioned that racism is a significant economic issue. So elaborate on how racial inequity affects the broader economic landscape and why addressing it is not just a moral imperative, but it's an economic necessity.
It is. At this dispensation in time, like we kind of drew the short straw on this. We, meaning everybody who's drawing breath at this point.
Yeah.
Like we drew the short straw. So here's the reality, Robin. Let's see. By 2045, we know that Black people and Hispanic people will make up the demographic majority in the United States. Arguably in the world, like we see that the world is browning and ever more becoming blacker and browner. But in the United States, the date will be around 2045, where adults in our country will be largely Black and Hispanic.
Yeah, it's only 20 years away, 21 years away. That's not far.
Talk about it. Right. Now, what is clear to me, having worked now with the Federal Reserve for 7 years and studying this in large part, is that both monetary policy as promulgated by the Fed and fiscal policy as promulgated by Congress are very dependent on the health of the middle class of the United States, median income earners, as a proxy to determine how the overall economy is performing. Like when both of those bodies of policymakers, they're looking at, okay, what's happening with savings and spending in the middle class? What's happening with home ownership attainment, higher education attainment, investment trends, wage pressures as experienced by the median income earner? Now, in this inflationary climate, median income is anywhere between $60,000 and $120,000 a year. because the Fed and Congress pay so much attention to what's happening in middle class, and we've always presumed that middle class is a proxy for the whole like economic enchilada. The health of the middle class is important. Now, the middle class has always, always been supported by the people who are the least encumbered in getting in it, and the majority in the demographic reality in our country. So, said differently, we have always, since we've been studying monetary policy and fiscal policy in this way, been fairly reliant on just the presumption that white people who are not encumbered in the ways that Black and brown people, they've always been the majority, and they've always been healthily represented in the middle class, right? So it's always served as a perfect proxy for us to then determine how we're going to just set monetary policy and fiscal policy. Now, for the first time ever in just 20 years, that you talked about 21 years, we will be relying on Black and brown people to be in the middle class, represented in middle class, well, like all throughout it, so that the formulas, the thinking, the presumptions, and the theories around monetary policy and fiscal policy can work. And so we also know, if anyone has studied this, that Black people and Hispanic people have never been represented in the middle class in a meaningful way, statistically meaningful way, like ever in our nation's history have we been represented well in the middle class. In fact, even as we sit here today, if you look at it statistically, in terms of statistical significance, Hispanic households are just now encroaching into the bottom layer of middle class attainment. Black households have never, ever been represented in the middle class statistically, in a statistical significant way. That has to change in 21 years. Not only must we be, Black people and Hispanic people, be represented in the middle class, we must be represented throughout the entire strata, right? And so we've got to close that gap. And the biggest impediment to Black and brown economic mobility is the way that we experience racism at work. And that's not the world according to Nikki. The Fed has studied that, Mercer studied that. We've got like all kinds of reports out there. And I will call your listeners to a report that was issued by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, I think it was 2021, called The Economic Gains from Equity. And it was very dispositive and clear that racism is the biggest threat to our nation's economy because of the advancing demographic reality. I'll sum it up by saying this. We will be reliant on, as a country, we will be reliant on the very population of people that we have all been conditioned to marginalize, mute, stunt, and diminish. And unless we are unearthing that and understanding that this behavior, this choice, this belief system that we've all inherited and never really done much about. I mean, we've tried to erect a law here and there, right? We've never dealt with the belief systems. Unless we're able to, in just 21 years, we will be in an upside down economy.
And 21 years is a nanosecond.
Robin, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, girl. So we got to get on this. And when I realized that, I was with the Fed. It was in 2020, that year, that everybody had to sit down because COVID was doing what it did. And it was also a year of great racial reckoning. And it was, as I was looking at the numbers, I was looking at like the upwards of $16 trillion that we've already lost in GDP before Black and brown are the majority. What does it look like to live in a society where you've got the majority of your people can't really fully activate themselves and be participants in the fundamentals of how the economy works, the fundamentals of how political structures work, the fundamentals of how social systems work because of racism, and you're the majority? That's apartheid.
Yeah.
Right? That's an apartheid state. And so that's what I'm panicked about. And I'm so worried that we're not thinking about this work in that context. We're thinking about it as, oh, this is social justice and I'll get to it when I can. And, if we feel like helping out the poor Black and brown folks, then we'll do it. If not, whatever. In a climate where we see DEI like kind of being attacked very successfully, the DEI malaise, people are tired of it. People are over it. They think it's divisive. They think it's, a distraction from the work. And so what my goal is to give a different context and urgency to the way that we think about the work and then how we are ignited to further it.
Whew. I don't even know where to go with that. Oh my gosh. So for our listeners, we will make sure we'll find that resource and have it in the show notes for our listeners to reference. as well as numerous resources that Nikki has on our website as well. We'll have that all in the show notes. So let's dive into a couple of other ways outside of organizations that you are tackling racism through. And one is called the Rare Woman Collective, and it's RAARE.
Yes.
Share with our listeners what that is and how they can also become involved in it.
Cool beans. Yes. So the Rare Woman Collective is a racial equity program suite specifically for the inclined white woman who is interested in, curious about, wants to know more about how to advance racial equity at work, at home, and in the community. One of those ways.
Love it.
And it was birthed, Robin, from this understanding after I started Harper Slade, and we were doing really great work with companies, and I'm watching white men in particular really struggling, pushing through the struggle of how to work this thing. How do I talk about what I feel? How do I say out loud what my grandmother told me in, 1973 about Black people? How do I talk about that? But we're watching our clients really push. And I thought, this is great, but we still have just the 21 years. And so there has to be something that happens outside of work. And where is racism incubated knowingly and unknowingly? And oftentimes it's in the home and in the community. And who are the architects for consciousness and kind of helping to pave the way for how morals are established in the home and how values and how influence is wielded in the home? It's usually women. The third thing I thought about was also in 2020, there were so many of my amazing white sisters who were coming to me, asking me how to help with everything around Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery. And I didn't know what to tell them. And I was up to here with my own exhaustion and I was scared. And I just didn't know how to help white women figure this out because I was trying to reconcile my own deal. So the Rare Woman Collective it's a set of experiences, coaching programs, their events. There's a community, like a Facebook community, all white women who are coming under the tutelage of me and my team for purposes of understanding, how do I talk about race in my home? What am I missing with my kids when they come back and say they don't want to play with this kid anymore or that kid? And I'm like, I'm not teaching racism at home. How do I deal with that? How do I respond? How do I raise my kids in a way that doesn't make them fearful or shameful, but does help them to understand the race conscious navigation that is ours to own, right or wrong? How do I influence my spouse? How do I talk to my father? How do I talk to my brother? How do I deal with the Thanksgiving dinners that are invariably super consternation filled whenever the topic of race or racism or politics comes up? And so we help with that navigation, and we help them think about, in a very grace-centric way, how do I advocate from the potency of the currency of being white, a white woman? So there is some currency around that because women are very powerful and can really influence differently because of our powerful selves. Women have the position of mom, wife, daughter, sister, and there's power in that influence just because of that seat. But then specifically, white women have proximity, the third P, power, position, proximity to white men who, on the topic of race and equity, really have to be moved. And so it's harder for me to come into your home, Robin, as great as you are, and talk with your family members and the men in your life in particular about racism. But I can teach you how to do it, right? And I can support you through it. And if you get your head handed to you, I can be like, oh, come on, girl. Okay, tell me what happened. Okay, here's another strategy that you can think about. Or maybe you're not really understanding, like, we got to deal with this stuff human to human, not angry person to other person. And how do you preserve the relationships, which is so important to me? Because like, we're not out here disrespecting our dads and our grandfathers and our husbands. Like, we're not doing that. But we can influence out of love and influence by offering into the ether another way to think about this huge problem that we all have called racism. And how do we, like, this thing is threatening our country. It's threatening our country. So how can we reposition it in our family to make sure that we're prepared for this particular battle. So anyway, that's what the Rare Woman Collective is about. I'm so excited about it. We have lots of events. We have Rare on the Road, where we're traveling to various cities. Our next city will be Denver on April 5th. So we'll be in Denver. So we'd love to have women show up for that. We have all kinds of training on our website. We have a subscription plan on our website. We've got an extraordinarily active Facebook group. We're international at this point. We've got women from London and Germany and from Sydney, Australia, who are part of the collective. So it's growing by leaps and bounds. And we'd love to have you, Robin, and whoever else that's
listening. I'm in. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Love it.
Incredible. Great. So you're recognized for your relatability, your accessibility, and your diplomacy, which you've demonstrated beautifully so far in this podcast episode. How do you leverage those qualities in your advocacy work? And what advice do you have for leaders looking to make a difference in those areas?
Yeah, listen, to me, I start with an understanding that at our core as human beings, we all want to have our dignity preserved when we're engaging with one another. We all want to be affirmed for who we are and not condemned constantly for who we're not. And that there's a level of validation that we seek, whether we want to admit that or not, just in the humanity. And so what I worry about sometimes in the name of race or equity or DEI is that we've reduced the work to harm swapping. And I've suffered for so long, now it's your turn to suffer. Or, the only way I can get you to wake up on what you're doing to me is to yell at you and to cuss at you and to, condemn the who of you. We've lost sight of the art of critical thinking, of dissecting arguments to compartmentalize the person from the issue. And that we're also, in my opinion, slightly arrogant enough to believe that we all haven't fallen victim to the narrative around mattering. All of us have, including Black people, Black and brown people. So we've been sold a lie. Racism is a lie. Racism is the belief that Black and brown people are inferior to white, and it's the systems, the structures, the norms, and the policies and the rules that protect that belief. We've all been sucked into this ether, right? We're all in a sunken place. And that started hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so we're all in this together. And I firmly believe that racism has stolen from white people too, and will continue to do that. And that you have a right to be as angry at it as I am. It's stolen differently from me and my family, clearly, but it doesn't mean that it hasn't stolen from yours. And it continues to rob from you every single day. And so I want you to be empowered. I want anyone who's advocating in the space to feel empowered to attack this common foe that lives inside of all of us, and to be thoughtful and careful in how we're doing that, so that we're not eviscerating hearts and minds at the same time that we're trying to kind of extract this particular cancer out of people. And so the attributes of advocacy are one that I am extraordinarily disciplined around. And I talk about that a lot in my work with the Rare Woman Collective, because I'm not trying to deploy an army of angry white women. That's ineffectual. And so I want you to be very thoughtful and careful about how you're approaching these topics, and with the understanding that we do have to be disciplined, we do have to be precise, and we do have to be kind of aligned to a certain framework, certain norming, certain nomenclature, certain definitions, and that we're bringing this offering into our families and into our communities as a way of resetting and casting new light on how humans engage with one another. And that is, I think, beautiful work for women to do in particular, because in many ways we're already naturally wired to do it. We're life givers, literally and figuratively. So we take a thing and find a way to give it life. And you don't give life by killing something, right? Or destroying something. You give life that then begets other life, that renews life. So those attributes are so important. So like, we're not harm swapping over here. We're not doing broad swaps of who we can't stand. We're not condemning white men. We're not condemning Christians. We're not condemning Republicans. Like, we're not being inartful and cruel, even though the world is, especially on this topic. That's not who we are. So we're really, really clear. I mean, I spend a lot of time on the attributes of advocacy as a racial equity. At least if you're going to be in the Rare Woman Collective, then that means you got to sign up for it too. So it's very, very disciplined. And the people that I work with at Harper Slade, our team, we're also very very centered on this. We see this work, if I'm honest, as ministry. It's important, like, to approach it in that way. We're giving the world a gift, and because it's important to share this good news and this, these new possibilities of how to be with one another. And that's a different heart posture. It's a different way of sitting and standing and approaching this work. So that's what we spend a lot of time on, those principles.
So for our listeners that they're totally moved by this conversation and they want to contribute to racial equity, either personally or within their companies, what are some tangible actions that they can take from this podcast episode and run with? What are some things that they can do?
So I'd say inside of companies, I think this feels like it's not tangible, but it is. I think just understanding that inside of the social structure called work, there are extraordinary inequities along racial equity lines. There just are, in terms of the employee life cycle. And understanding that without feeling like I now have to condemn myself is so important. So recognizing and almost being on the hunt for the way that inequity and exclusion shows up naturally in the workplace is really important. And just presuming that, and that recognizing that I got to be a part of the solutioning against that. I just have to kind of push against my own nature in many ways to be different in that way. And then one other thing I would want to reemphasize that you beautifully asked me about earlier is that we have to think differently about ROI, return on investment, as it relates to this DEI work. We will never see. I promise you, in our lifetime, we just won't see it. But this work at this point is about the active seed planting, cultivating that soil, softening it, planting those seeds, and to a certain extent, watering them. They will bear fruit for the world that will be evolving by 2045 and beyond. We are resetting humanity for our children's children and their children. That's what we're doing. Right? We have to do that right now. Otherwise, we're going to be living inside of an apartheid state, in which case everybody's going to be in survival mode. And it's going to be even more calcified and more metastasized. So we have to be about that work now. And I'd say that the same kind of thinking is true whether you're in work or outside of work. So even as we're thinking about how we're raising our kids, how we're talking to the men in our life in particular, who are out here who feel the most disconnect. I'm picking on men a little bit because they feel the most disconnected from all of these principles, and in some ways have been, yelled at the most, and fussed at the most, and the target of everybody's ire. So that just really appreciating that the approach, the skill building is in the approach. We already know what we want to say, but the how we want to say it can't be reckless. Otherwise, we won't be able to move and reset and recast in the way that we have to.
Yeah. Whew. So this episode is going to air in March, in Women's History Month. And you have a beautiful story as to how Harper Slade was named. So in honor of Women's History Month, share a little bit about where that title came from and your grandmother's.
Yeah, so my grandmother's, my father's mother, Lenora Harper Robinson, and my mother's mother, Ernestine Johnson Slade, were mavericks in their own right. Beautiful, incredible, strong Black women who each of them raised 8 children and held down work and had a beautiful home life and a beautiful social life. But they were also very involved in what they called Negro rights initiatives in their day. Now, they didn't even know each other, but they raised children who ultimately found their way toward marrying one another, right, who then kind of continued their legacy. And so when I was thinking about the nomenclature, the naming for Harper Slade, what I wanted to do was acknowledge the deposits that my grandmothers have made in the society as they knew it, in their home life as moms, as daughters, as wives, as community members, and as people who were women who were very focused on the advancement of rights of people who look like them. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to acknowledge that, and I wanted to celebrate it and recognize it. I wasn't kidding at the top of the call when I talked about this assignment, this Harper Slade work, this race and equity work. I'm honored to carry it as a part of my kind of in utero given assignment on behalf of my grandmothers and my parents. And so this is a tribute to them every day that I get up and do this work and talk about this work and say the words out loud. Harper Slade, it reminds me of who I am and who they were. And, it's just a wonderful kind of legacy building.
Yeah. So where can our listeners learn more about you and Harper Slade?
Yeah, so our website, www.harperslade.com. We actually are revamping it, and we'll be rolling out a new website and new logo in a couple of weeks. So check us out. The Rare Woman Collective, and Rare is two A's, so RAARE, Woman Collective. Check out the offerings there and visit us in one of the cities that we're coming to. And then also check out my website, nikkilanier.com. We've got lots of great resources out there, lots of opportunities to kind of check out when and where I'm doing speaking engagements or media appearances. So there's just lots of opportunities to stay in contact with us. Of course, reach us by email, admin@harperslade.com. I'm on LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook. I'm everywhere. This is like everywhere.
Yeah. So we will have links to all of those resources in the show notes. Nikki, thank you so much. This was a much needed conversation, and the way that you approach this work, I just love the unique angle with which you approach this, and it's so desperately needed. So thank you for this conversation.
Oh, it's my honor. Thank you so much, Robin.
All right, everybody. We'll see you back here next time. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to Women Igniting Change. I know creating change matters to you. If you enjoy what we talk about on the show, please take one action today and share it with someone who could benefit from listening. Until next time, keep standing up and speaking out for what matters.